A new Cornell University study finds that President Trump is the leading driver of misinformation on the coronavirus. The leading driver. Researchers examined nearly 38 million English language articles on the pandemic published from January 1st to May 26th in traditional and online media. Nearly 3% of those articles contained misinformation, and about 1.1 million articles. The president made up nearly 38% of mentions within the misinformation conversation, as the study calls it. Researchers found that a prevalent topic of misinformation were miracle cures, including Trump's comments on anti-malarial drugs and disinfectants, like this claim from back in April.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
Okay, I just want to point out that he said in the debate that was him being sarcastic. Nothing sarcastic about that presentation by the president. According to the study, a day after Trump floated that claim, over 30,000 articles were published under the category of miracle cures, days before it was fewer than 10,000 articles. Joining us now, New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters, author of Winners Take All, MSNBC political analyst and publisher of the newsletter The Dot Inc. Anand Giridharadas, and associate professor of political science at Fordham University and political editor at thegrio.com, Christina Greer. Great to have you all on board. Anand, let's talk about the spread of disinformation and how that is part of a bigger picture when it comes to dictator wannabes or, autocratic wannabes. And this is what Trump, most facts will tell you, is the spread of misinformation muddles up the discourse, and it gets to a point where nobody knows what's true. We're not there yet, but boy, it's coming close to the election, and he's even doing it to the election.
Well, I think what you're absolutely right, and what Tuesday night revealed was that this election contest is no longer principally a contest between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It is a contest between a wannabe dictator who wants to do a coup for one, and an election about we the people and what we choose. And he has set up very clearly that he is running against the process of people choosing. That is his real opponent. And so if you're going to do that, if that's your strategy, disinformation becomes incredibly important. Muddying the waters, having people not know their own heads anymore becomes incredibly important. But I think it becomes all the more important to tell people when those waters are so muddy, when they are hearing that votes may not be counted, that this is not to be confused with the idea that they don't have power, right? This is, if you look at other countries that have gone through this, your father worked so much on countries that had these kinds of pretender leaders trying to do these kinds of shenanigans. If you have this kind of moment, people have more power than they ever have had before. And the people who have the most power now in this election are apolitical people, people who have not voted, people who've passed up the opportunity to vote for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. There's many of those people in our country. And those folks, the people who feel like maybe both parties are kind of corrupt, maybe who feel like politics doesn't really affect them, people who feel like it's all a game for the moneyed, and there's truth in a lot of those feelings. Those people, I want to say to you, you have tremendous power to cut through this disinformation and assert your power to choose a destiny in which women are not getting forced hysterectomies in concentration camps, in which young kids are not waiting in line for food banks instead of going to school. You have more power than you have ever had in any election.
Professor Greer, as you watch that debate, I'm curious, as someone who studies political science and teaches political science, what you thought just about the process. Forget the moments and the rudeness and all the other things that we've been talking about for 2 days, but just about where our political process and what kind of a statement that night made about it.
Well, it's quite embarrassing. I woke up the next morning to texts from friends in Europe and the continent of Africa, and they were just shaking their heads in disbelief. While I watched the debate, I also was monitoring a WhatsApp chain of my students as they had conversations about what they were seeing. I mean, keep in mind, I've got only 3.5 months to get 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds invested in their own democracy, interested in participation, thinking of themselves as public servants one day in a myriad of levels of government, local, state, and even federal. And their sheer disbelief that Donald Trump is the leader of our nation right now, the behavior that they witnessed, knowing that they would never be able to behave in such a way in a university setting or at a job. And to know that the international community is looking at us, the emperor has no clothes, and to see the president relying on musings, as Anand said, shenanigans, and just a pure disbelief in facts. I always tell my students, we must read. We must read to know what happened in the past, and we must read to better inform our own decisions. And this is a man who proudly says he doesn't read. He just knows things, and he's not listening to scientists. And sadly, we have only 210,000 Americans who have died, 210,000 families and communities without loved ones, and the president shrugs it off. And keep in mind, these numbers are rising. We haven't even hit our second wave. And so to see young people so disgusted and disbelief with our political system, and I have a limited amount of time with them in an intro to politics class to get them invested, it's definitely made my job much more difficult. But I think that there are enough good public servants out there who are working to help distill the misinformation and the disinformation that the president and his party, quite honestly, put out on a daily basis.
So, Jeremy Peters, your most recent piece, it writes about Trump supporters and how they're reacting to his unwillingness to say, yes, I will, if I lose the votes, transfer power peacefully. He's been muddying those waters as well. How about after the debate? What did they feel after the debate? They say, good performance by our guy. We like what he did. We like the way he performed. When you put those together, what do they see?
I think what this really sets up, given Trump's refusal again in the debate on Tuesday night to say that he would leave office in a peaceful transfer of power, is an incredibly messy situation after the election if indeed the ballots aren't counted and we have a situation where we don't know who the winner of the presidential election is. I think that's what makes this election so different and what makes Trump's claims of voter fraud, you know, the idea of ballot harvesting, all of these falsehoods he's put out there about the safeness of voting, that's why they're so dangerous now. Because it's likely, given the prevalence of mail-in voting in this election, we're not going to know on election night. And that's a situation that voters haven't really processed in their heads. And when we talked to them over the weekend and, you know, over the last few days, one thing they all said was, you know, every election night for as long as I've been alive, pretty much, have gone to bed, woke up, and, you know, we know who the president is the next day. That may not be the case this time. So when you have President Trump talking about ballots being stolen or filled out with false names or dead people getting them, and it's created this uncertainty and this doubt that his supporters, who are already pretty susceptible to this, given the information ecosystems they live in, for these supporters to believe that the election is actually much less safe than we know it to be right now. So when they hear him say, "Oh, I'm not going to agree right now on the spot to leave office peacefully," it actually makes sense to his voters. You know, it sounds to them like he's just saying, "Well, we're going to wait and count this out," but that doesn't actually sound like what he's saying. What he's saying is, the only way that I could lose is if this election is stolen from me. And that's something no president has ever said before.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.